Let us hope no one remembers the scandal." With those words, Eleanor Ainsworth was being sent back to the one place she never wanted to see again, London. Her brother-in-law, Elias, stared at her like she was dirt beneath his shoe, completely unaware that his warning was already too late. Because the scandal wasn't just some forgotten gossip. It involved the most powerful man in England, a man she had publicly humiliated 11 years ago. A man who now set the fashion for the entire country. A man so rich he could crush her without a thought. And that man, he was Lord Blackwood. The same Lord Blackwood that some people, in hushed whispers, still called Figgy. And she was the one who gave him that name. Before we dive into the disastrous season that shattered 2 reputations and the reunion that could destroy them all over again, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of historical scandal and epic romance. What would you do if you had to face the person you'd humiliated most? Let me know in the comments below. Eleanor winced. "My behavior has been exemplary since my return from London," she answered stoutly. "You still sketch," Elias said in a tone usually reserved for accusations of prostitution. "All ladies sketch. Your skill betrays you. Those portraits you do are scathing, as you well know." Her portraits were really nothing more than quick outlines, impressions Eleanor gathered from the people around her. But Elias had once seen one she'd done of him, and he had recognized the parsimony shining in his eyes. He had not forgotten or forgiven. Flipping open the fat book of accounts in his hand, he shook it at her. "I can scarcely yet believe I financed that ill-begotten season of yours. It was not my duty to stand the blunt, but I did it on my dear Melba's urging. Nothing good came of it." She'd heard this refrain many times. 11 years ago, he had paid for her clothing and rented a house in a fashionable part of London. And how had she repaid him? With disaster. But he hadn't done anything for her. He'd done it for Melba. For Melba, her sister and his wife, whom he had revered with all the meager passion of his mean-spirited heart. Eleanor had done it for Melba, too. Even at the age of 18, Eleanor had known she was ill-suited to society, but Melba had lightly dismissed her qualms. "Darling, you must marry. What else is there for a lady to do?" Looking back, Eleanor suspected Melba had known she was dying and maneuvered to move Eleanor from her home to her own household. Now, faced with Melba's widower, Eleanor knew her sister had been right. It would have been better to be any man's wife than to be Elias's mere dependent. "I've been your housekeeper. I've raised your daughter." She took a quiet breath. "Now I'll be her companion." He turned to the window. "I could have hired someone else to do those things, and more cheaply." She bit her tongue. No doubt that was true, but she wondered, sometimes, why no one cared that Lord Blackwood had ruined her. Why a female's reputation could be held so cheap. Yet none of this mattered anymore. 11 years had passed since she'd lost her respectability and her muse in one dreadful episode. "I question if Lord Blackwood's consequence has suffered unduly from the incident." "Lord Blackwood's repute is ever growing," Elias said. "When he was wounded and returned wearing an eye patch, every modish buck took to wearing one." Eleanor sank back into her chair. "He was wounded?" Elias turned from the window. "I said so, didn't I?" She didn't want to display interest, yet she couldn't refrain. "Did he lose the eye?" "I don't know. How should I know?" "As I told you, we're not intimate." She pressed her glove-clad palms together so tightly the muscles of her arms ached. Lord Blackwood's health was of no concern to her, she chanted in her head. Yet in London she might see him, just from a distance, and despite her efforts, excitement wriggled along her nerves. "I've placed the sum of £10,000 in the Bank of England," Elias said, returning to his accounts, "but I expect an accounting of every cent." "You shall have it. Isabel must have the best to outshine all the other debutantes." "That's another thing." Elias poked his finger toward her. "You needn't think I will buy you another wardrobe." "Any clothing I have needed since my season I have purchased myself," Eleanor said proudly. Her reminder irritated Elias. He didn't know where she had come by her money. He would have preferred to have her beg him for every halfpenny, no matter that her small store of funds was almost depleted. "I still think you should stay here in Sittingbourne." He didn't have to tell Eleanor that. She knew he had wanted to keep her here, imprisoned in this tall, thin, somber house, until everything bright and hopeful in her had withered. Sadly, she had wanted it too, to go out and face the world again after what she had done. She pressed her hand to her side where a stitch of fear stabbed at her. She was 29 years old, firmly on the shelf, and when she remembered the disastrous season in London, she knew she would rather beg on the streets than return to that scene of unspeakable humiliation. But she was returning. In these grim years of servitude, she had learned many lessons, not the least of which was a hard-won poise. So she would go to London. She would see the nobles who had peopled her nightmares. They would not even recognize her, but she would be there to witness Isabel's triumph. It was Isabel who mattered now. "We told Lady Tarrington we would arrive this afternoon," she said. "I think it would be best if we left." Elias leaned back in his chair. "Go on. What are you waiting for?" Startled by his sudden dismissal, Eleanor walked toward the entrance. As she opened the door, he asked, "Do you know Dame Moulton?" She paused. "The butcher's widow. Of course I know her. A mean, pinch-mouthed woman. She and I have come to an agreement. We will be married next month." He sounded pleasant as he uttered the damning words she'd feared to hear every day since Melba's death. "You'll have to find somewhere else to live. London is so vast." Isabel March kept her pretty face pressed to the glass of the carriage window. Now she turned away and covered her nose with her gloved hand. "And it stinks." "The Thames is quite pungent today," Eleanor said, her mind still reeling. "Homeless." The word echoed with the clatter of the carriage wheels. "Is something wrong, Aunt Eleanor?" Head tilted, Isabel watched her. "It was my father, wasn't it? He upset you." How could the girl seem so simple, and yet, at the same time, be so shrewd? The bitter words fought to be said. Yet she had ever protected Isabel from the worst of Elias's faults, and she wouldn't heap blame on the guileless girl now. "Your father is concerned about economy. As always, that's never agitated you before." Isabel took Eleanor's gloved hand. "Do tell me, Aunt Eleanor, was it him or is it me?" "You?" The carriage jolted along the cobblestones. "Why would I be upset with you?" Isabel's head drooped. "You didn't want to come, but I couldn't have a season without my dearest aunt. I would have been frightened without you." Looking at her directly, Isabel said, "Call it fondness, Aunt Eleanor. I love you too much to leave you behind." Now that Eleanor did believe. Putting her arms around the affectionate girl, she said, "I couldn't bear to be left behind either. I would worry." "About what?" Isabel hugged her back. "This is the first step to a fabulous season." As a girl, Eleanor, too, had seen London as a stepping stone. After, she would see Rome, Paris, and the New World. She would live an unorthodox lifestyle, wherein charm and beauty mattered little, and talent and dedication measured a woman's worth. Nothing had turned out as she had imagined. The carriage drew to a halt in front of a tall home in Cavendish Square. With a flourish, Lady Tarrington's footman placed the step and flung wide the portal. When she stepped outside this carriage, she would officially be in London. In London, where the ton fed on scandal, and the insignificant Eleanor Ainsworth had once been the main course. Then from the top of the stairs, a call came. "Eleanor, dearest Eleanor, you're here at last!" Framed in the doorway stood a fashionable woman, joy lighting her face. A remembrance surfaced. Of a girl, tears streaming down her cheeks, crying out to Eleanor's retreating form, "Come back to London as soon as you can! We'll make Blackwood sorry, I promise you." Eleanor trod lightly down. "Lady Tarrington, what a pleasure to see you!" "Enough!" "Eleanor, don't you start that, Lady Tarrington. Nonsense. I'm Lillian." Lillian bounded down the stairs, took Eleanor's arms, and looked into her face. "We are friends, are we not?" Relief flooded Eleanor. "I do hope so." Linking arms with them both, Lillian led them up the stairs. "We must get busy. We have less than a month to prepare for Lady Goodrich's ball. It's the first of the season." And so, a month later, from the top of Lady Goodrich's broad stairway, Eleanor looked down upon the glittering, garish ballroom. Below her, the glittering crowd seeped in and around the pillars, a tide of silk, jewels, and perfume. Her new gown of deep green silk felt alien against her skin, a costume for a part she no longer knew how to play. She was a chaperone, invisible and silent. She had repeated the mantra all evening, but her heart refused to listen. It hammered against her ribs, anticipating a confrontation she desperately wished to avoid. Then she saw him. Julian Croft, the Marquis of Blackwood, stood near the card-room, looking like a god who deigned to flatter unworthy mortals with his presence. He stood tall and proud, dwarfing the other gentlemen. His blonde hair was cut to perfection, each strand glowing like molten topaz. His noble jaw jutted at precisely the right angle. This god was arrogant and impatient with the world. He lifted a silver quizzing glass, his gaze sweeping the room with a cool disinterest that was a study in aristocratic power. Time had been kind to him, deepening the lines around his eyes, broadening his shoulders, but it had not touched the cold perfection she remembered. He was searching for a partner, and the debutantes along the wall watched him anxiously, moths awaiting their call to the flame. He was still the most sought-after man in England. And as she watched, the glittering ballroom dissolved, the music faded, and the 11 years between then and now vanished. 11 years before. It was he, Eleanor thought with feverish pleasure, Julian Croft, the Marquis of Blackwood. She ached to sketch him. He was her muse, her inspiration, the silent recipient of the artistic passion that burned inside her. Thus far, in her first London season, she had seen no female worthy of him. Least of all herself, the Honourable Eleanor Ainsworth, daughter of the impecunious and deceased Viscount Baveridge. Blackwood lifted his silver quizzing glass. No one would make the selection for him. His glance fell on one of the Fairchilds, a Miss Redmond, and though she was beautiful, she clearly lacked character. He bowed to her, a sensuous exercise of muscle. He offered his arm. The chosen debutante giggled. "Stop staring at him," her sister, Melba, whispered, her voice tight with worry. "He's not for you." "I know that," Eleanor answered, but she couldn't look away. It was an obsession, this need to capture his likeness, to understand the perfection of his form. In the privacy of her rented rooms, she had worked for weeks, pouring all her secret observations and fervent imaginings into clay. It was her masterpiece. Later that evening, after being saved from the unwanted advances of Lord Ashworth, her attention was drawn to a commotion near the orchestra. Rosalind Finch, Ashworth's spurned favorite, stood on the dais, a malicious smile curving her lips. "I have made the most extraordinary discovery," her voice carried throughout the ballroom. "There is one among us who hides a pure, true talent." 4 footmen struggled out, carrying a draped, man-shaped form. Eleanor's heart gave an appalled thump. "So let me present you with," Rosalind pulled the drape away, "Miss Eleanor Ainsworth's own creation." Silence struck like a bolt of lightning. Then, like the rustle of wind before a killing storm, Eleanor heard the whispers slip across the room. "Blackwood! Lord Blackwood! It's Blackwood! He's naked!" For one brief moment of gratification, Eleanor admired the statue. Seen in the light of 1,000 candles, it was superb. The features were firm, full of pride and disdain. The classic pose displayed every muscle, and they seemed to move sinuously beneath the smooth clay skin. It looked so real she wanted to shout with pride. Surely these people would recognize art when they saw it. But she saw no admiration, only horror, titillation, contempt. Then a path opened between her and Blackwood. In the abstract, detached manner of one living a nightmare, she noted that his forehead throbbed with a bright red vein. His beautifully generous mouth was compressed into a tight line. His hands, clad in snow-white kid, flexed and unflexed, as if her neck rested between them. He was the incarnation of pure rage. Like a dam breaking, a comment from the crowd shattered their composure. Laughter blasted forth from every throat. The lords and ladies of the ton pointed, their fingers trembling. They laughed, until dark threads of coal dripped down the women's cheeks, until men's cravats withered, until Blackwood swore without caution, until Eleanor burned with a mortification so profound it scorched her soul, until her reputation was in shreds. Laughter. Eleanor could almost hear its echo in Lady Goodrich's ballroom. She would never forget. She flinched, then turned to see if they were pointing at her. They weren't. No one even looked at her. They all stared at Isabel. And why not? Isabel's blonde hair curled cunningly around her slender neck. Her gown of simple white muslin was tied with a gold cord beneath her generous breasts. The curves of her body undulated in a natural feminine rhythm that sounded the mating call to the male of the species. "Ma'am." A man of good height and close-cropped brown hair approached Eleanor and boldly took her hand. "If I were so forward as to introduce myself, would you introduce me to your ward?" Amused, she said, "Your friends scarcely approve." "They're not friends. They're turncoats." He glanced around. "But I have the approval of a peer of the realm. Blackwood, tell this honorable chaperone that I'm respectable." Eleanor didn't move, didn't look, but froze like a London street urchin who scented danger. From the corner of her eye, she noted a tall man step out of the pressing crowd, while the other gentleman fell back deferentially. She noted, too, that Blackwood stared at her as if she truly were a street urchin, streaked with soot and out of place. "I could hardly swear to your respectability, Leo, without perjuring myself." Blackwood sounded stiff and impatient, and Eleanor waited, quivering, for him to impugn her. "But I have met this lady before, and I can introduce you, if you like." That was all. Quietly he performed the courtesies, and his companion, Mr. Leo Maxwell, seemed unaware of anything unusual, his attention fixed on Isabel. When he had done his duty, Blackwood did not step away. The well-remembered scent of lemon clung to him as he pulled her apart from the company. In a voice low and intense with contempt, he asked, "Stop quivering so. Did you expect me to denounce you?" Slowly she looked up at him. She could have sworn she hadn't forgotten anything about Julian Croft, Marquess of Blackwood. But she must have, for his Viking beauty took her breath away. A faint white scar now traced a path near his eye, a mark of imperfection that only made him more compelling. His midnight blue eyes pierced her until she thought she must be bleeding. "I would not explain to that crowd that you single-handedly exposed me to ridicule and humiliation," he added. "For the most part, they have forgotten, and I have no wish to raise the specter of that scandal." He probably hoped she would turn tail and run. He didn't comprehend that worse things had happened since that long-ago ball. Her spine straightened, and flushed with an aplomb born of hardship, she said, "You seem to forget the scandal mortified more than one person." "Who?" His gaze swept the ballroom before returning to rest on her. Was he really so uncaring, or was he simply oblivious? "Such an inconvenience, my lord, to think of someone other than yourself," she said crisply. "So unusual for you, also." His nostrils flared as he considered her. "You are impertinent." "Following your example, my lord." Then Isabel's beguiling voice shattered Eleanor's fragile triumph. "And Eleanor, would you introduce me to his lordship?" Coming down to earth with a thump, Eleanor apprehended she couldn't afford the satisfaction of cutting Blackwood. He might be a rude beast, but he was wealthy, titled, and influential, and for Isabel's sake she had to preserve the fiction of mutual respect. She had perfected the unemotional mask. Now she donned it, performed the introductions, and waited, torn between satisfaction and old heartache, for Blackwood to see Isabel. To really see Isabel and fall under the spell of her womanly charms. The quizzing glass swept Isabel as she curtsied. "How do you do, Miss March?" His smile, his courtesy, his bow were everything a matchmaking chaperone could wish. And that was what she was, Eleanor reminded herself. A matchmaker seeking the best marriage possible for her niece. If that marriage happened to be with Blackwood, well, the fates had laughed at Eleanor before, and she had lived. She would survive this irony, too. "Do you have a dance reserved?" he asked. Isabel lavished a smile on him. "Aren't you lucky? I have just one left." "Then pray give it to my friend Leo." Blackwood sighed as if the prospect of a country jig with a lovely maiden bored him beyond tears. "He's a war hero, but he can probably still hobble around to a slow tune." Eleanor glared at the insufferable man. Did he think to avenge himself by his petty rudeness? For the first time he lowered the quizzing glass. The scar marred his face, drawing the inner corner of his eye down and streaking the skin of his brow with white. The disfiguration was slight, yet 11 years ago he had been perfect, arrogant, and thoughtless. In her heart, Eleanor had believed he was divine, untouchable. Now she had seen his marred face, and the earth shuddered beneath her feet. Nor could she ignore the character his scar added to his features, or the artistic itch in her fingers. "Lord Blackwood," Isabel's suddenly no-nonsense tone startled Eleanor. "You, in turn, must grant me a boon." Blackwood halted, his quizzing glass rising again. I must? "The dancing will start soon, and my aunt will be left without an escort." Eleanor gasped. "Isabel, no!" The lord and the debutante ignored her. "You'll care for her," Isabel said. "I will?" "Yes." 11 years ago, Eleanor had devoted her every waking moment to a study of Blackwood. She had hung on his every word. She had deciphered his every expression. Now she saw him look around, noting the silence that had fallen. She knew he was weighing the consequences of a contemptuous refusal. She saw the moment when he made his decision. A tight smile thinned his generous lips. He bowed gracefully and extended his hand. "Escorting this lady would be my dearest pleasure." Eleanor viewed Blackwood's white-gloved hand so disdainfully he was tempted to check for a spot. "I can't leave Isabel alone," she said. "Of course you can." He separated her threaded fingers with what he considered remarkable patience, then grasped one hand and pulled. "All her dances are taken. Your duty is done." The foolish woman set her heels. "I truly can't. Gentlemen are not gentlemen where she's concerned." He glanced at Isabel, smiling and flirting. "I suspect that is true. However, scandal is seldom allowed to rear its ugly head in my sister's home. In fact, it has been almost 11 years since the last scandal." She tried to wrestle her hand free. 11! "Time flies." He gripped tightly. "Do you want me to drag you across the ballroom? I believe that would cause the kind of infamy you delight in." She stumbled forward under the threat, and he placed her hand on his arm. "Now let us make a circle of the ballroom and squelch any rumors." "There are no rumors." Stiffly she walked beside him. "There will be if you don't smile." He grinned down at her, demonstrating his self-control, and hoping he annoyed her as much as she disturbed him. Yet she walked at his side through the crowd, her gaze resting on no one, serene as a black swan cruising through a pool of gabbling white geese. The woman had no right to act so sedate, not considering her succès de scandale. "Has anyone recognized you yet?" "No. As a chaperone, I find I am invisible." He had scarcely thought about Miss Eleanor Ainsworth in years. He could have sworn he hadn't. But when he saw her, all the old rancor came rushing back. He still wanted revenge. She was still as damnably tall. Her figure still put him in mind of the Valkyries, strong and curvaceous. She still spoke in that rich, clean voice, and her features were still too distinct for a feminine face. Yet she had matured. She no longer looked at him with worship-struck eyes. "I'm doing this for your own good," he snapped. "Ah, and I thought you were doing it because Isabel commanded you. It must be very uncomfortable, my lord, to be a leader of society and fear the memory of an old calumny." "I would not find the recollection nearly as uncomfortable as you, Miss Ainsworth." She paused, then in a colorless tone she said, "For Isabel's sake, you are correct." He was, of course, relieved. He led her on, nodding to acquaintances, aware of the stares following them. They were interrupted by his sister, Beatrice, Lady Goodrich, who greeted Eleanor with surprising warmth before dispatching Julian for refreshments. "I understand you're that girl's chaperone," Lady Goodrich said as she adjusted her skirts. "Isabel, yes, she's my niece." "Of course, Melba's girl." Lifting her monocle, Lady Goodrich looked her up and down. "Looks just like Melba." "Yes, she is just as beautiful." "But a Widgeon, where the mother was not." She turned a look on Eleanor. "Still, you'll do." Eleanor didn't exactly know what that meant, but she said demurely, "Thank you, my lady." Lady Goodrich watched her closely. "When my brother returned from the peninsula, he almost totally abandoned society. I told him, 'Figgy, you're 34, titled, still unwed, and, most important, quite wealthy. You need a wife.'" Eleanor subdued a smile. "Did he agree?" "He never agrees with me. Lady Goodrich smiled, her powder cracking. But in his maturity, he does tend to do the things he thinks are right, regardless of how painful they may be. His reckless ardor during your ill-advised visit to his home laid the tombstone on your reputation. I dare say he will now seek to redress the injury. Eleanor found herself stirring uncomfortably. It wasn't ardor, my lady, but vengeance which drove him. Come, my dear, you can't cousin me. If you will recall, I was one of the women who found you. Lady Goodrich glanced around the ballroom, and her eyes narrowed. With a smile, she focused her attention on Eleanor. I recognize ardor when I see it. Heat swept Eleanor from toes to hairline. She looked hopefully toward the banquet room, and found Blackwood standing close by, holding 2 plates and impassively listening. Ransom, Lady Goodrich sounded demurely pleased. You brought dinner. As you instructed. But he was looking at Eleanor. Good heavens, man, I don't have time to eat. Lady Goodrich hefted herself out of her chair. I'm the hostess, and the dancing has started. She pointed to the seat she had vacated. Ransom, you sit here. You, Miss Ainsworth, enjoy the party. In sinking dismay, Eleanor watched her go. Your plate! Blackwood thrust it beneath her nose. He seated himself beside her. The almond biscuits are rather good. She risked a glance at him. 2 deep lines dug their furrows between his brows. Surely the appearance of his scar, while distressing, conclusively proved he was not a god. She would not allow him to manipulate her again. Any unwanted attention would quickly fade. Then a familiar voice called, Eleanor. Lillian hurried toward her, anxiety on her face. Eleanor, she's gone. Eleanor had braced herself for one debacle. Now she faced another, far worse disaster. Lillian's quiet voice shivered on the breathless edge of panic. Isabel has disappeared. Is your entire family driven to misadventure? The question hovered at the edge of Blackwood's mind, but he had too much mastery to say such a thing. Miss Ainsworth looked white and shocked, and stared at him as if she expected him to swoop in and make everything better. He had nothing to do with this, except that he had taken Eleanor away from her charge against her wishes. He found himself handing their plates to a passing footman and walking after her as if she held the string. Moreover, he had a duty to England which surpassed Eleanor and the fate of her charge. He had returned from the war not just wounded by shrapnel, but with a promise made to a dying boy from his estate. He was hunting a traitor, a spy high within the ton, who was feeding information to the French. It was why he was here tonight, enduring this crush. The revival of this old infamy with Eleanor could be utilized for that purpose. His gaze darted to where she and Lady Tarrington stepped through glass doors that led to the garden. If he appeared to be courting Eleanor, all of the ton would be so entertained they would never think to examine his motives. Even the traitor himself would be unwary. Yet to seek the whispers and the laughter. He clenched his gloved fist. No, damn it. Only if he had to would he use her as a distraction. Then, from behind him, he heard his sister's voice. I do so want your charming brother to meet my youngest, said Lady Kennard. Of course you do, Beatrice replied. He stands alone. Shall we intercept him? The garden and his obligation to his country beckoned. With swift resolution, he marched toward escape. As he opened the door, he heard Eleanor ask fiercely, Which of the men are missing? I saw her last. Leo Maxwell stepped out of the shadows. She danced off with Mr. Joyce and never returned. An unsavory character, Julian said. Southwick was dancing with another gel, Leo added, and he heard Joyce say something about sundials. Sundials? Julian looked around at the darkened garden. Miss March couldn't be so foolish as to follow him out at night. Isabel is not noted for her good sense, Eleanor said. The group moved into the garden, following a darkened path toward the sound of hushed French voices and a low, breathless giggle. They rounded a corner and found Isabel standing in the middle of the path, her back to them, giggling at a tall, dark, well-dressed gentleman. Sprawled between them lay Mr. Joyce, his eyes closed, a dark bruise marring his chin. J'ai un escalier, Isabel was saying. And Eleanor, the girl cried, turning. You found me. I told Lord de Valmont that you would. De Valmont. Julian slipped to cold alertness. He had met him before, this immigrant from France, but Julian had not recognized him. The man had a way of blending into his surroundings. And what had Mr. Smith said? We know about the Vicomte de Valmont, but how's the information passed to him? How's the information being taken from the Foreign Office? He speaks French like Monsieur Dubois, Isabel said enthusiastically, and he's been letting me practice. I know you told me not to believe a gentleman, Isabel explained to her aunt, but Mr. Joyce seemed so nice, and he knew a way to tell time by the moonlight on the sundial. He wanted to kiss me, and do lewd things to me. I told him no, but he wouldn't listen, and then she held out her hand to de Valmont, and he stepped over Joyce's supine body to take it. This gentleman came to my rescue. It was an honor, de Valmont murmured, his French accent lilting. Showing an immense amount of good sense, Eleanor looked at de Valmont without favor. I don't believe I know you. Allow me. Julian moved to Eleanor's shoulder. Miss Eleanor Ainsworth, may I present the Vicomte de Valmont? Eleanor murmured, charmed, in her most matronly tone. But de Valmont clasped his chest and staggered back. Miss Eleanor Ainsworth? You are Mademoiselle Eleanor Ainsworth? Yes. Eleanor edged closer to Julian, away from de Valmont's inexplicable enthusiasm. Julian touched her. Just a brush of the fingers against her shoulder blades, but enough to encourage her. Mademoiselle, this is such an honor. The slimy frog took Eleanor's hand. I have seen your work. Absolute quiet descended on the garden, the statue. Pure horror thrummed through Julian's veins. Sounding as alarmed as he felt, Eleanor sputtered, My work? De Valmont seemed puzzled. Yes, I saw your splendid painting. Relief choked Julian. Then another possibility, more horrifying than the first, occurred to him. Had she been painting him as she had once sculpted? In staccato demand, he said, A painting. Of what? De Valmont sighed in extravagant homage. Of sister goddesses, the blonde beauty is so frail, and the other, you, Miss Ainsworth, so strong, and the final parting so near. Whatever this painting was, it could not embarrass him. The painting is of Miss Ainsworth and her sister, then. We? I have seen grown men wipe tears away from the sight of such pain and such dignity. Isn't it? Isabel wrapped her arm through her aunt's. I remember the picture. She painted it for Mama, but Papa didn't like it, so after Mama died, it disappeared. Everything about de Valmont made Julian's skin crawl with loathing. Where did you view this work of genius, my lord? He asked. As if to confirm his suspicions, de Valmont's smug smile flashed in the dark. Why, where it belongs, in the only place where true civilization exists. In France, my lord, in France. And with a sly grin he added, at Fontainebleau. At one of Napoleon's homes. Julian's hatred for France clutched at him, cold and sharp. He had to know more, but the slippery bastard might be suspicious. Two could play that game. He would appear to take the bait. Grasping Eleanor by the elbow, he turned her to face him. How did your painting get to France and to Fontainebleau? The pale moonlight played over her features. Your question is an intrusion, my lord. Bonaparte might not have the breeding to offer my lands back, de Valmont said, but he has excellent taste in art. So true, Leo Maxwell said, with obvious contempt. He acquires it from the countries he conquers. Miss Ainsworth's country has not been conquered, Julian pointed out with chilly precision, but perhaps Miss Ainsworth nourishes a surreptitious admiration for this emperor. Lillian took an audible breath. Julian, apologize. Eleanor jerked her arm out of his grasp. My lord, you are offensive. Untouched by the tense atmosphere, Isabel gurgled with laughter. Oh, Lord Blackwood, you're so silly. Aunt Eleanor didn't give the painting away. If you knew my father... Isabel, Eleanor said sternly, this is private. He didn't want to support Aunt Eleanor, so she had to. Putting her hand over Isabel's mouth, Eleanor said, That's enough. Locking her gaze with his, she said, It is, quite simply, none of your affair. As the small group strolled back toward the ballroom, Julian found himself thinking. So Eleanor had experienced poverty. Yet look at her now. Her glacé silk gown was au courant. Her shawl was Belgian lace. Either she had made quite a lot on her paintings, or someone else had paid. Who? And why? De Valmont moved to her side and spoke in a barely audible voice. She shook her head in rejection, but de Valmont insisted, pressing a piece of paper into her hand. With a show of reluctance, Eleanor slipped it into her handbag. Then, as if nothing had happened, she said, "We shall go in, as if we've had a nice walk outside. Smile, everyone." De Valmont opened the door, and music and laughter blasted out. Eleanor led the way inside. Julian followed, and as he did, he decided. He would proceed with his plan. The courtship would begin in earnest. He laid his hand on her waist, near the small of her back. She looked up at him, her green eyes wide and startled. Her eyes had looked the same that morning so long ago. Wide, startled, and, finally, passionate. "Blackwood!" A grinning, perspiring Lord Ashworth faced him. "Who would have thought such a prunes and prisms as you would deign to reintroduce Miss Ainsworth into society?" Ashworth extended his hand toward Eleanor. "Miss Ainsworth, I would recognize you anywhere." Heads turned. Ashworth's voice carried, and the name Ainsworth attracted attention. Her hope for anonymity toppled. "Ashworth, what have you done?" Rosalind, Lady Ashworth, squeezed through the throng. As always, she was beautifully coiffed and gowned, yet to Julian she resembled an Egyptian scorpion. "You've embarrassed Miss Ainsworth, Miss Eleanor Ainsworth." Rosalind's poisonous gaze flicked at Julian, and she projected her voice with full-bodied delight. "So good to see you with her, Lord Blackwood." And what a surprise after all these years. But no one used Julian to further a vendetta. He waited until the titters had died down. With incisive authority, he said, "If I have chosen to escort Miss Ainsworth for the gratification of her company, no one will question my decision." Jaws dropped in unison. Leo Maxwell looked as poleaxed as anyone. "Begod, Blackwood, do you realize what you said?" "Yes, I do." He then turned his cold fury on Rosalind, silencing her attempts at further scandal. His sister, Beatrice, arrived to disperse the crowd, leaving him alone with Eleanor. The game was afoot. With slow deliberation, he slipped his fingers under her shawl and up her bare arm. He saw her swallow as his flesh met hers. Every eye in the ballroom clung to them in avid fascination. He affixed a tender, lightly amused smile to his lips, leaned close to her, and quoted her in an undertone. "None will recognize you. No one will recall the disastrous season." Steadily she watched him, her emotions well guarded. "Guard yourself well, my darling Eleanor." She flinched as, for the first time, he used her given name. "For I right now see no reason why I should not take the rumors to truth and take you to my bed." "I haven't invited you." Her answer was made up of equal parts, determination and dismay. He relished both. "I can persuade you, Eleanor." "No, I wouldn't be so foolish twice." "If that were a wager, Eleanor, I would not advise you to take it." Letting her go, he bowed with every visible indication of respect. "Watch behind you, Eleanor." "I'll be there." The day of the picnic dawned bright and clear. The journey to Goodrich Manor was an exercise in strained civility, with Lillian and Lord Tarrington attempting cheerful conversation, while Eleanor stared resolutely out the window, and Isabel detailed, with unnerving accuracy, every one of Lord Blackwood's physical attributes. "His hair is a very unusual color," Isabel mused. "Not quite gold and not quite yellow. What color would you use if you painted him, Aunt Eleanor?" "Yellow ochre," Eleanor corrected automatically. "The base pigment would be yellow ochre." "That's right! Blonde, and his eyes are such a blue color. So blue, just blue, almost purple blue." Isabel fanned herself with her hand. "What I really like about Lord Blackwood is his face. He looks so stern, almost angry all the time, except when he looks at you, Aunt Eleanor." "How does he look, then?" Lillian asked. "I think the word is lustful." "That's enough, Isabel," Eleanor said sternly. This whole situation had gotten out of hand, and Eleanor needed to set it right. To do so, she would have to ascertain if Blackwood suffered from lunacy, or was simply toying with her affections as a means of revenge. They arrived at Goodrich Manor, a fine example of Georgian dignity, constructed of a flaxen stone that glowed in the sun. Around it, a well-cut lawn slid away in a silken stretch of green toward the rolling hills and sandy dunes bordering the Thames. It was a blissful place, a perfect blend of impetuosity and caution, and for one selfish moment, Eleanor coveted it. A figure coming from the house caught her attention. Only Lady Goodrich's upright figure could have prevailed over the vibrancy of her pink gown. She walked briskly, with Leo Maxwell trailing like a recalcitrant lad. "Miss Ainsworth," her voice boomed out, "I understand I have you to thank for this invasion." Eleanor's resolution wavered, then strengthened. Dipping into a curtsy, she said, "It is not me you should blame, my lady, but your brother." "Bah! He scarcely knows good sense when he's with you. He's around here somewhere, condescending to speak even with the cits who dared appear." Lady Goodrich's gaze was sharp. "Miss Ainsworth, you've driven him insane with passion." "He has always been mad," Eleanor replied frostily. Tossing back his head, Leo Maxwell burst into laughter. "That's telling her!" Lady Goodrich slapped him across the arm with her fan. "It's your fault I was dragged along today." "I freely admit that," Leo said, grinning. "But I'm dancing attendance on you as penance." His easy charm seemed to fluster the formidable Lady Goodrich, and she rounded on Eleanor again. "You, miss, will catch flies with that mouth hanging open." "As I was trying to say, Miss Ainsworth, I would strongly suggest you marry Julian during this brief flash of sanity. With a man—" She glared at her companion. "One never knows how long it will last." Eleanor, seeking a moment of peace, found a quiet spot on the ridge overlooking the beach. The Tarletons wandered off, and Isabel, after a brief chat, hurried away to join the other young people flying kites. Soon, Eleanor was alone. It felt rather odd to be within sight of so many people and yet apart. But she had her own entertainment if she dared. Lillian had tucked her portfolio and pencils into her satchel. Sketching was a ladylike endeavor. Why shouldn't she? Over the years she had smothered the inclination, yet now the need to create had returned with the force of deep waters too long dammed. Seeing Blackwood had made it worse. She glanced around. Her thoughts must have summoned him. Informally dressed in riding clothes, he strolled among the blankets, chatting with his visitors with a geniality she considered outlandish. She studied him, her artistic instincts yearning. But no, not him, not again. She wrenched her attention away. A flotilla of ships rounded the point of the Thames and headed for the open sea. In these dark days of Napoleon's continental blockade, they were the only thing that kept these innocent people safe. Yes, she would sketch the ships as a symbol of hope. Involved in swiftly capturing the outline, she didn't hear the crunch of footsteps. When a shadow fell across her pad, she looked up in annoyance. "Pardon, mademoiselle?" Still blocking her son, Lord de Valmont smiled down at her. "You have the look of a very strict teacher just now." "My Lord de Valmont, how good to see you." "And so soon," he mocked her, insinuating intimacy. "May I see?" Leaning over, he looked down at the portfolio, then up at the ships, then down again. "Magnifique! You have captured les navires perfectly. I would love to have this drawing." He stretched his hand out. "You will permit?" Eleanor felt a pang. The sketch was good. "I could create one for you, too." "You are too good." He glanced out to the river. "That is a handsome one." She looked where he pointed, to where the ship, the Virginia Belle, plain and brown, raced past. "If you would draw this ship for me, then I would have a memento too." With a clean sheet, she used quick strokes to outline the Virginia Belle, while de Valmont squatted beside her, praising her artistry. When the flotilla had disappeared, she said, "There, I'll take it home and finish it." No, I wish to take it just as it is." He put his hand on her portfolio and tugged. She tugged back, confused. He had no right to tell her when she was finished. "No." "Mademoiselle, s'il vous plaît, you will do as I say." He grabbed her fingers and began to twist. "Lord de Valmont, what are you doing?" "Shh." He glanced around. "Mon Dieu!" He let her and the portfolio go as if they had burned him. "You take the drawing home and finish it. We will meet later. In the meantime, perhaps you should hide this." "I beg your pardon?" "Lord Blackwood is headed this way." As de Valmont hurried away, Julian saw Eleanor place her drawing in her portfolio and shut it hurriedly. Then, looking like a puppy caught shredding her master's slippers, she stared straight at him. The pained anticipation in her wide eyes squeezed his heart. His manner was rather crisp when he said, "Miss Ainsworth." "Yes," she answered with patently false enthusiasm. "I'm pleased you accepted my invitation. I found myself unable to decline." She blinked at him with false innocence. The sarcasm amused him. He had hoped his courtship would distract attention from his objective of searching for a traitor. As he glanced around at the interested faces, he recognized he had prevailed. And as he looked at Eleanor, he decided this was not such a difficult duty. "May I sit?" "As you wish," she managed to look disinterested. He settled on the blanket's opposite corner. "What were you drawing?" "I believe you have forcefully expressed your disinterest in my art, my lord." "I am making conversation to woo you," he said, almost meaning it. She leaned forward fiercely. "And when you have had enough, and drop me once more into the grease, I will fry in hell while you go your merry way." "My dear Eleanor, if I drop you in the grease and leave you to fry in hell, it will be for a damned good reason, like treason." "The drawing, my lord, was not of you." He spoke of treachery, she spoke of art, but she was an accomplished actress, and he was not misled. After all, he had his watchers and the report on her activities. "I'm crushed. Has my form lost its allure?" "Yes." Her bald answer didn't match the quick look she gave him. "You'll go to hell for lying faster than for having discourse with me." She still clutched the portfolio, and one of the papers stuck out. "What did you want to talk about?" He'd won the first skirmish. "I wanted to apologize for dismissing your worries at my sister's ball. I didn't realize Miss March had such a penchant for trouble." She visibly relaxed. She has little sense, and men, when they are around her, have even less. He watched Isabel with her kite. "It's been difficult for you." "She's too sweet to be difficult, but ever since—" Eleanor glanced at him briefly, as if she just remembered to whom she spoke. "Since?" He strove to look interested. "You are too easy to talk to, my lord." Most people did not find him so. "I am remarkably discreet." "I'm sure you are." She looked at the toes of her shoes. At 14, a young gentleman in our neighborhood fell violently in love with her. He was the son of a Methodist, sober and hard-working, and I never suspected he would kidnap her. Intent, he scooted closer. Kidnap her? He forced her into a cab and declared they would go to Gretna Green. I was frantic for hours. When she appeared at home, no worse for the experience. She convinced him she could not in all conscience leave me alone with Elias, and they came back for me. "Good God," Julian repeated. He looked at Isabel with new eyes. "What will you do when she marries? Will you live with her?" "Perhaps." In her lap, Eleanor's fists clenched. "Perhaps I shall just do as I've longed to do, go out into the world and seek my fortune." "Doing what?" he asked sharply. She glanced down at the portfolio. "Teaching young ladies their art." A picture formed in his mind of a procession of young women, all working in clay and creating nude statues of the men they admired. How appalling! She glared. "I would be good at it." Or you could spy for the enemy. The thought sprang forth, waiting to sabotage any trust he might have in her. Eleanor had no future, no reason to love English society, and a regrettable tendency to hobnob with a known spy. Impatient to end the charade, he said, "De Valmont is an irresistible fellow, is he not?" She dropped her gaze. A blush stained her cheekbones. "I hadn't really noticed." Ashamed, goosebumps prickled his skin. She twisted uncomfortably under his stare. She wasn't an actress at all, only a remorseful woman driven by circumstances to spy. "You were speaking to him earlier." Yes, he admired my sketch. The other hand kept a tight grip on the incriminating papers. It was time to end the game. With awesome deliberation, he reached for the portfolio. Her fingers tightened for a moment, then loosened, and she let him take it. Still watching her, he opened the pad and glanced down, his gut clenched. "What is this?" As if he couldn't tell. "The ships," she said, improbably earnest. "And this?" He held out the clear, detailed drawing of the Virginia Belle. "Another ship," de Valmont suggested. His ire burned deep and cold. You can't even take the blame yourself." Standing, he grasped her elbow and jerked her to her feet. With the sketch pad held tight in one hand and Eleanor in the other, he wheeled and marched her toward the manor. "Where are we going?" She tried to twist her arm free. "To teach you a lesson." "About art?" No, he didn't look at her. He didn't dare. "About life." He whisked her into a maze of tall, well-clipped hedges, his goal, the sweet, warm heart of it. A place of roses and gurgling fountains he knew from childhood. Striking without notice, Eleanor jabbed his ribs with her elbow. He doubled up, dropping the portfolio. She spun away, and he charged, catching her and pulling her into the thorny tangle of rose stems and blossoms. Thorns pierced them both. Blood trickled from a scratch on his jaw. Tears sprang to her eyes. "What are you crying for?" he asked. "It hurts." "I'll make it better." Lifting her hand, he brought the palm to his mouth and sucked on it, an act of cleansing so intimate she closed her eyes. He drew forth a thorn, then placed his slashed hand beside hers, palm to palm. "When our blood mixes, we're joined." "Blood siblings," she said, trying to lessen the meaning. "No, darling, whatever I feel for you, Eleanor, is not brotherly. In fact," he lifted her chin, "what I feel for you is quite carnal. I will show you now." He tumbled her backward onto a soft hillock of grass. His kiss was no longer greedy, hungry instead, with an edgy anger he could not have displayed 11 years ago. "Why?" she murmured against his lips. "Because someone needs to keep a leash on you." He unbuttoned her bodice, loosened her chemise, and stared as if he couldn't look enough. "Beautiful," he whispered, "just as I imagined." He didn't touch her, not with his hands. Instead, he plucked a single pink rose, snapped the thorns from its stem, and brushed the velvet petals across her lips, her jaw, her neck. She arched and sighed, a captive to the exquisite torment. He followed the blossom's path with his mouth, his tongue, until she whimpered. Then, with painstaking care, he plucked each petal and let them drift down to decorate her bared skin, one on her throat, one in her hair, and at last, the smallest, firmest inner petal placed directly on her nipple. "Velvet to velvet," he said. The petal wavered as her nipple contracted. She arched up, into his hand, wanting more, wanting now. He moved beside her, his body a breath away from hers, and kissed her fiercely. "Lift your skirt for me, darling," he murmured. "Show me you want me." She did. With tormenting indolence, she inched her skirt up, revealing silk stockings, garters, the ruffle of her drawers. When she stopped short of her hip, abashed, she found his gaze fixed on her face with an intensity that scalded. "All the way, darling, please." She raised her hem to her waist. His hand stretched out, smoothing the thin cotton across her belly, then brushing the dark, curly hair hidden therein. His finger touched flesh. "Don't close me out. Not now." She wanted to protest, but her voice would tremble, so what could she do but raise one knee? "Oh, Eleanor. Oh, darling." He opened her, touched her, his fingers performing a slow slide up and down, each time almost entering, then skimming away. Her hips lifted, rotated, trying to tempt him inside. "Do you want me there, darling? Tell me, do you want me?" Did she want him? Yes, too much, for too long. If she said so, he would have a triumph greater than before, and her personal disaster would transcend any she'd experienced. But if she lied, and he withdrew, she would regret it for the rest of her life. "Yes," she said, "I want you." His finger glided inside her, and as his thumb pressed against the most sensitive place of her soul, she lost her last inhibitions. She moaned, her eyes closed, concentrating on that one place. "That's the girl," he sounded breathless. "A little further, a little higher." She reached it. Her whole body quivered, then clenched, every muscle tight, every sense shut down, except the newly discovered one of pure ecstasy. She thrashed and moaned and lived, totally dependent on him for every drop of rapture. When at last she came to calm, she saw him watching her, unsmiling, sweat beading his upper lip. He opened his trousers, then separated her legs with his knee, making a place for himself. He thrust his hips against hers as impudently as a man with the right. She clasped her thighs around his buttocks, urging him closer. He closed his eyes in one final ecstatic struggle, then lowered himself to her, chest to groin. And as if that were a signal to the skies, they opened to release a cold and drenching rain. Jane blinked, blinded by the wash of the heavens. The rain flattened Julian's hair and dripped on her, but for one long moment he hovered over her, protecting her. Then, swearing under his breath, he pulled her to her feet. With the rain sluicing through her hair and the wind plastering her wet gown against her body, she looked disconsolate and guilty. "Here, darling, let me help you." He pulled the edges of her bodice together and tried to match the buttons to their holes, but his fingers fumbled over her blue-veined breasts. "Let me do it." Her hands hovered above his, afraid to touch him. Yes, he released her and stepped back. That would be wise. He led her from the maze, his hand firmly on her arm. "We'll have to go to the manor house," he said, his voice tight. She didn't want to go. She could tell by the way she tried to lag behind. His sister, Beatrice, could be discerningly blunt. God knew what she would say. But they had no choice. At the manor, the butler, Ilford, bowed them into the grand entry as calmly as if dripping people regularly took shelter there. "Greetings, my lord. We've been expecting you. Lady Goodrich is in the library." The fire was surrounded by commodious settles and comfortable chairs, one containing his formidable sister. "Come close," she said bracingly. "Don't hover, Miss Ainsworth. You'll not get dry that way." She gestured impatiently. "The maids have towels and blankets. Dry yourself and wrap up immediately." Julian wrapped a towel around Eleanor's shoulders, then another he placed on her head and dried vigorously. She felt ridiculously cared for, and ridiculously exposed. "I find myself curious as to how you got in this state," Lady Goodrich said, handing her a cup of tea. "I drew a picture," Eleanor said flatly. Lord Blackwood objected. "A ship," he snapped. "An English ship going out to sea." "I never knew you were such a Philistine, Julian," his sister said. "Miss Ainsworth lacks the maturity to know that negotiating the shoals of art can be treacherous," he said, his gaze locked with Eleanor's. Her teacup rattled in her saucer. "I am quite mature, my lord. I doubt you could find among your acquaintances any woman as mature as I am. You are still a maiden." "Is she?" Lady Goodrich asked. Julian ignored his sister. "You are unproven in the experiences which mature a woman." "My lord," Eleanor's voice glittered, "I assure you I am an adult. It began that moment in the ballroom when Melba collapsed. For a year I watched my sister die. I made a deathbed promise to care for Isabel, and I have lived in the house of a miserly merchant, reviled and unvalued." "Oh, my dear," Lady Goodrich said softly. "No, don't pity me, my lady. My travails made me strong." She looked into Julian's eyes, allowing him a brief glimpse of her soul, full of anguish and honest pain. "Because of you, I never held on to fatuous hope. I knew no man would come to rescue me from my misery, for what man wants a fallen woman? You are not fallen." "Only you and I know that, my lord," she pressed her hand to her chest. "But I have triumphed. I have survived. I have my dignity, and if my dreams have withered, well, that is a woman's destiny, isn't it?" By God, he did feel guilty. He was guilty. Then his sister, prosaic as always, said, "Miss Ainsworth, while this is all fascinating, none of it explains how you got a rose petal stuck in your hair. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe your bodice is buttoned crooked." "Should have let me do it," Julian said, sotto voce. Eleanor covered herself with a blanket, looking suddenly tired. Lady Goodrich, with surprising gentleness, insisted she retire to a guest chamber. As a maid led her from the library, Eleanor's gaze fell upon an arched nook she hadn't noticed before. There, illuminated by a branch of candles, stood the source of all her youthful anguish, the statue. "I had it bronzed," Lady Goodrich said in a conversational tone. "Good, isn't it? Not a master's work, of course, but that statue is a fine likeness of Julian." "It is good." Eleanor couldn't keep the note of pride out of her voice. Blackwood averted his eyes. He hadn't looked at the damn thing in 11 years. He glanced once, then covered his eyes with his hand. That was as bad, worse than he remembered. Good God! The girl had insulted him as no one had dared before or since. And she still didn't even know it. With an attempt at civility, he said, "I keep the statue here for the moments when he is insufferably arrogant," Lady Goodrich announced. "Then I remind Figgy that all of us have our shortcomings." Stiff with pride, Eleanor looked between them. "I don't understand, my lady. How could anyone who gazes on this statue think Lord Blackwood has any shortcomings?" Blackwood adored her. She was the only woman he had ever met who left his sister with nothing to say. Moreover, he owed her reparation. "Eleanor, there's no remedy for it." Stepping to her side, he enveloped her rigid form in a hug. "I shall have to marry you." Wrenching herself free, she said, "My lord, I don't find that amusing." Taking her cold fingers, he said gently, "I wasn't jesting." Her chest rose and fell in deep, baleful breaths. Her eyes glowed green as a spitting cat's. "In that case, I must respectfully decline. I don't think I could bear to become any more mature." Striding to the door, she opened it so hard it banged against the wall. Miss Eleanor Ainsworth, the woman who could be a French spy, had refused his suit. 2 weeks later, Eleanor stood in the garret of Tarlin House. The chamber was bright with afternoon sunshine, full of large, dust-cloth-covered objects. It was a surprise from Lillian and Isabel. "It's your studio, Eleanor," Lillian said softly. "Studio," Eleanor blinked. Sure, she had imagined the chisel, the wood blades, the wire-end tools. "For you to do your sculptures," Isabel added, her voice hopeful. "It's very nice. More than nice. It was a miracle. It would give Eleanor back the greatest pleasure of her life." I don't know what to say." Funny. Her voice trembled and her vision blurred. "We thought you might have something you wanted to sculpt," Lillian said, moving toward the door. "Or someone," Isabel added. Eleanor didn't need the unsubtle suggestion. Already her palms could almost feel the sensation of cool clay as she shaped the jut of his jaw. She was alone, shut in with a bucket of clay and her thoughts of Blackwood. Maddening, faithless Blackwood, whose form had been almost completely revealed to her. She reached out and sank her hands into the cool depths of her beloved clay. A few days later, a note arrived from Julian. It was cloyingly sweet, an invitation to call that was so unlike him she knew it was a command performance. He wants something, she thought, her suspicion warring with a flutter of hope. He arrived that afternoon to find her in the new studio, dressed in work clothes, her hands gray with clay, working on a rough, man-sized statue, a noble brow, a proud nose, a muscled chest. He saw it, and the intervening years of war and duty and suspicion vanished, leaving only primal humiliation and fury. "You still don't have it right." Stepping inside, he slammed the door. "Damn it, Eleanor!" He ripped off his cravat and collar. He wrestled out of his coat and waistcoat. He opened his shirt so abruptly the neck string tore. This is what I look like!" She stood posed, her hands gray, staring with a kind of wonder. Her work had cast a spell on her, replacing virginal shyness with avid curiosity. Deliberately, she put down her tools and walked toward him, circling him, her gaze a marvel of aesthetic delight. Without shyness, her hands reached out and pushed the fine linen shirt off his shoulders. "Beautiful," she murmured. "Better than I'd imagined." She laid hands on him. She didn't mean anything by it. He knew that. Her art held her in thrall. But he was here. He lived in the now. Rage cooled. Fire smoldered. Her fingers molded the column of his neck, traced the line of his ribs, explored the juncture of skin over biceps. She was an artist. He had given her what she wanted, a living model. His heart thumped hard and languorous. Her hands guided him again to face her. She stroked his arms. With her gaze and her touch, she explored each tendon in his hands. "Look, you have a scar here." "Fitz dared me to climb out the dormitory window, Eleanor?" So perfect and yet so human. "Eleanor!" His desperation penetrated her absorption. "What?" He took her wrists and guided her fingers to the flap of his trousers. "Here." Frowning, she looked into his eyes. No embarrassment flickered there. She was vitally, vibrantly interested. "Yes," she said. "This is what I want." He had never desired a woman like this in his life. With sure, easy strokes, she unbuttoned him, then slid her hands along his hips and pushed his trousers down. "Eleanor, untie the drawers," he said, his voice hoarse. She thought no more of viewing him than of viewing a marble statue, but marble was not so hard as he. She was already freeing him from his last scrap of clothing. He just wanted her to see him, really see him. Then she did. Oh. Just, oh, but that one word made him grow when he thought he could grow no more. "I've had the proportions wrong." She put her hands on her hips, her head tilted as she studied him. "How stupid of me! Of course!" Slowly her hand extended and she touched him with the tip of one finger. He might have been burned with a branding iron. He groaned without thought or pride. She started and snapped her hand back. "Did I hurt you? Remember when I touched you yesterday?" he managed to say. "It hurts like that." Her eyes grew brighter. Gently she wrapped her palm around him. Far too much. Putting his hands on her waist, he looked at her, alive, bright with curiosity. He would not deny her or himself ever again. "Eleanor, let's finish this. I can be who I want to be." She gestured to the statue. "I've been stifled, shut in, cut off from sunlight, but I can grow once more." "Me too," he said, a little too fervently. "I want your boots off." She wanted him totally naked. "I want to see your feet." He was bribing her to copulate with him by allowing her to see his body. He exulted. She knelt and pulled his boots off, then his trousers, then his stockings. He was nude, sitting on the floor with the westering sun streaming through the windows and a woman kneeling at his feet. With Eleanor, it felt just right. "My feet are large for a woman's." "You're large for a woman," he stroked her hand. "I like knowing I don't overwhelm you." "No," she said it, but her gaze fell. Ever so subtly she ran her palm up the inside of his thigh. Torment, or bliss, he didn't know which. "You've been studying this," he said. "Art?" "No. How to make me demented. I'm only doing what you did to me." Disappointment twisted inside him. Revenge, then. She paused. "Is that what it was yesterday?" He'd said the wrong thing. Never. Taking her wrist, he lifted it to his lips. "Yesterday was not revenge, Eleanor. Yesterday was pure pleasure." Happiness shone from her. "Come, sit on me," he commanded. "No, you come." She rose and extended her hand. He took it and stood. Behind a dressing screen, she dragged a long sofa cushion to the ground. He stretched out on it. She knelt beside him, and this time, neither art nor respectability distanced her. Eagerly, she ran her hands over his chest, down his belly, and closed her hand around his rod. He grabbed at her. Softly. "Of course." Her touch gentled. "Disrobe," he commanded, his voice rough. She stripped off her apron and gown. He attacked the ties of her chemise. They were wrestling, fighting for control. He rolled off the cushion, and while he gasped for breath, she straddled him and laughed, low and deep. Leaning down, she said, "You do as I say." "Yes." He realized the slit of her pantalettes gaped, her loins pressed against his. "Whatever you say." He grabbed the back of her head and pulled her the rest of the way. Their open mouths met. Everything was sharper, fresher, newer with Eleanor. He rolled with her, putting her under him. He grabbed handfuls of petticoat and pantalettes and pulled, bringing everything down around her ankles. She helped him, shoving the material off with her feet. He was inside her, and she closed around him, almost too tight. She struggled, fighting to pull him in. Briefly, her maidenhead challenged him. Then he broke through, slid home, and was done with fortitude. He thrust again. She thrust back. This was war. This was strife. This was mating. Groans broke from her throat, filling his ears as he filled her body. He leaned over her, called her name. "Eleanor, look at me." Her eyes fluttered open. "See the face of your lover. Not a statue, not an art object. Your lover." "Yes." Reaching out, she caressed his cheek. "My lover." Her touch magnified his sense of triumph. Her fingers clenched his waist. She lifted her hips to take all of him, and froze. Her eyes rounded. Every muscle deep within her spasmed around him. Frantic, he crushed her into the cushion. He hammered into her. He reached his peak. Arrested in the supreme moment, they stared at each other. This was it. They were mated. He shuddered, sinking down to cover her with his body. He was possessed by her. He ought to say something meaningful. But first, he had to lift himself off of her. He was reluctant to relinquish control, almost as if he thought she would flee. He raised his chest. Her head was turned away. Alarm stabbed at him. "Eleanor!" Her head turned, and in clear, precise tones she said, "You need a leaf corresponding to the size of the trunk." It took a moment. The statue, yes. She frowned. "That's why you've been so angry?" "Eleanor, you don't want to talk about this now." "I want to understand. Is that why everyone laughed?" She sounded faintly scornful. Annoyance made his voice rough. "Don't dismiss it as a small thing." "Don't worry. I'll get the proportions right from now on." She struggled to sit up. He didn't let her. He was still inside her, and with very little provocation he could teach her the proper way to end a love scene. "Get off," she pushed at him. "No." He caught her hands. She kicked at his legs. He seated himself firmly. If she wanted a fight, he'd give her one. They struggled silently. When she suddenly stopped, she shushed him forcefully. Then he heard it too, the creak of the stairs, a rap on the door, and Isabel's bright voice as she opened it. "Reverend Ridings, Mr. Southwick, Lord Mallory, Mr. Brockway, I had no idea you gentlemen were so interested in art." Beneath Julian, Eleanor whimpered. "This is my aunt's new studio. Aunt Eleanor is supposed to be in here somewhere." Isabel's footsteps moved into the chamber. "I don't know where she went. Oh, look, a gentleman's boot." Beyond the screen, silence reigned. Then Mr. Brockway said, "Blackwood's boot." "Do you really think so?" Isabel asked. "Yes, how silly of me. I recognize the tassels." Horror etched Eleanor's face in stark lines. "There's another boot." Isabel might have been an explorer on an expedition of discovery. "And his coat, and waistcoat, and shirt, and—" She paused. "Trousers." Julian recognized Lord Mallory's voice. "Miss March, those are called trousers." "Oh," Isabel sounded surprised. "What do you suppose this means?" "Marriage." That horrific scene in the studio, Garrett, had meant marriage, and as quickly as possible by special license. Between Isabel and Lillian, they had made sure of it. Julian had gone along willingly. If she hadn't personally seen his dismay, Eleanor would have thought him in on the disgraceful arrangement. Vanquish her he had, since their wedding a week ago, repeatedly and with great vigor. She had resisted, reciting poetry in her head, pretending to be elsewhere. She hadn't won, not once. With charm and a devastating knowledge of her body, he had forced pleasure on her. Each time, a little of her resentment had been chipped away. He knew she hid within the sanctuary of her mind, and he wanted all of her in his arms. She hated him so much. She loved him so much. She would never settle for second place again. Yet what could she do? She had married him. He had proved her rancor was but the foolish wavering of a woman unsure of her allure. What an irony to discover it wasn't her charms, he doubted, but the character of which she was so proud. A fortnight after the wedding, Eleanor stood on a balcony overlooking the Manwins, crowded ballroom, a glass of untouched champagne in her hand. Below, the ton buzzed. They marveled at Julian's dedication to his plain new wife, and tonight they were having a laugh at her expense. "He's following your niece like a stallion scenting a mare." Eleanor didn't turn. She recognized the voice. Rosalind, Countess of Ashworth, had sought her out to say what everyone was thinking. Clenching the balcony's balustrade, Eleanor stared down at the crowd around Isabel. Julian's head lingered close. He didn't interfere with the other gentlemen. He seemed to encourage them. But these were not the actions of an infatuated husband. They were the actions of a disgruntled lover. And why? Eleanor didn't know. Since their wedding, they had spent every moment together, either passionately entwined or preparing to be. They had been creating the kind of unbreakable bond one always dreamed about. Or so Eleanor thought, until today, when his valet had brought a message. Julian had risen, read it, and in a voice absent of inflection said, "We're going to attend the ball at the Manwins." "How humiliating for you," Rosalind said with vicious glee. "But you must have known it could never have lasted." Turning, Eleanor stared down at Rosalind. "I would like to paint you, not as a human, but as a badger, all teeth and bristling fur." Rosalind bristled. "You are a bitch. You come to London and steal the man I've chosen." "You chose Blackwood?" "No, Ashworth. He was mine until you showed up." "I don't want Ashworth." "I never wanted him." "That's the worst of it, isn't it? He wanted you. You wanted Blackwood. I wanted Ashworth. And no one wanted me." Rosalind drew back, her cheeks a ghastly pink. "That's why it's such a delight to see Blackwood betray you so quickly." Eleanor stared over the rail again. Julian was still there at Isabel's side, and Eleanor was faint with jealousy. Jealous of her own niece, when she didn't even believe there was anything between them. Julian had never indicated any interest in Isabel. Not even from the first moment he'd laid eyes on her. Most men were bug-eyed at first sight of Isabel. Julian had been engrossed by Eleanor. "And now you don't even have your art," Rosalind said with spurious sympathy. Eleanor tore her gaze away. "What? You've given up your art for your true love. Isn't that right? My French tutor told me today. What's his name? That earnest young man. Monsieur Dubois." "Yes, that's him," Rosalind smoothed her brows. "He's such a bore, but when he hands me a piece of interesting gossip, I would hardly forget it. Monsieur Dubois says I have given up art. Only yesterday, she had sent a farewell message to Monsieur Moreau, explaining that, out of practical considerations, she had given up her impossible dream. How had word spread so quickly? How does he know that?" "I don't know. I suppose he heard you say so when he was teaching your niece." Eleanor found de Valmont in the crowd. He stood alone, his gaze darting about. That day at the beach, de Valmont had indicated he knew Monsieur Dubois only vaguely. Yet Dubois must have spoken intimately with de Valmont. There was no other explanation. "Rosalind," Lord Ashworth spoke from behind them, "stop tormenting Lady Blackwood." Eleanor twirled and saw Ashworth standing a little too close. "Go on, woman," he said, smiling affably at Eleanor, but talking to Rosalind in a tone that made Eleanor cringe. "Lady Blackwood doesn't need to listen to your poison." Whatever Rosalind saw in his face frightened her, for she backed away rapidly. "I'm leaving." Ashworth spoke mildly. "You can almost smell the jubilation in the air tonight." Jubilation? Down on the floor, Julian never spoke to Isabel. He just watched and listened. About what? "My dear Lady Blackwood, haven't you heard the report? A ship full of French soldiers came ashore near Dover." Ashworth enunciated each word, watching her. "They attacked the garrison and were captured. The commander confessed to receiving false information through the spy network. It seems they were told the garrison was poorly manned." "How curious. Does anyone know how this happened?" "Apparently the French spy network has been infiltrated." He didn't sound happy. "Inevitable, I would say." At the end of the gallery, an elderly man in an old-fashioned black jacket walked toward them. He had an air of command, and Jane found her gaze caught by his. "Lady Blackwood?" he said. "Yes." "Good. I had wanted to meet you. I'm Mr. Smith." He bowed, then looked beyond her. "Your companion couldn't wait to leave." She glanced around. For the second time in her life, Ashworth had disappeared. Mr. Smith's next words proved the circumstances were just as dire. "I'm a director in the Foreign Office," he said. "Your husband reports to me, and he tells me he believes you're a French spy." A spy. Julian believed she was a spy. The words echoed in her head, a litany of betrayal. The world tilted, the glittering ballroom blurring into a vortex of light and sound. She didn't remember leaving the ball, or the carriage ride home. She only remembered the cold fury that settled in her heart, a block of ice where warmth and hope had so recently begun to bloom. She found herself in her bedchamber, the room she shared with him, and a destructive rage overtook her. She swept vases from their tables, tore at the bed hangings, flung open her art supplies. She set up an easel, stretched a canvas, and began to paint. She was still painting when Julian strode in, his face a mask of concern. "Eleanor?" We looked for you." Then he took in the rumpled counterpane, the broken crockery, the easel, and the brilliant, angry colors that smeared it. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" "I'm painting." She pointed her cobalt-dipped brush toward his face. "Do you have any objection?" He took a step back. "No." "Good, because I wouldn't care if you did." He stared at her feet. "You're dripping paint on an Aubusson rug." "What difference does it make?" She gestured grandly, and drops flew from her brush. "I'm a Quincy now. I can do whatever I want." His brow knit. "Eleanor, you're acting oddly." "I'm acting oddly?" She tapped her chest. "I'm not the one romancing my niece." "Ah," he loosened his cravat. "I was afraid you might have noticed that." "I would like to explain, but I'm afraid it's not possible." "Not possible?" She smiled with false affability. "You act as if it's a matter of national security." He cleared his throat. "Well, actually, the way you're acting. You might have been hanging near Isabel to hear who she told her newest French phrase to." "I beg your pardon," he snapped. "That was your intention, wasn't it?" He strode over and grabbed her wrist. "How do you know about that?" "I'd love to tell you I figured it out on my own, but that wouldn't be true. The truth is, tonight I met someone. His name was Mr. Thomas Smith." She enjoyed the exuberant pleasure of watching Julian's jaw drop. "Yes," she said, "Mr. Thomas Smith, an interesting man, and very direct. Do you know what he told me?" Julian touched the spot between his eyes. "I can't imagine." "He told me you thought I was a spy." He looked wholly discomfited. "Well, yes. If you think about it, you can see where I got that idea." The evidence pointed. "You," she pointed at him, "thought I," she pointed at herself, "was a spy." At the time, it took me quite a bit of explaining before Mr. Smith was convinced I was not a spy. He seemed to think he couldn't leave such a matter of grave national importance to you. He thought you were prejudiced in my favor. Prejudiced in your wife's favor. What a novel idea! Words failed her. "Feel betrayed?" She mixed red and blue into an atrocious shade of purple. "I was betrayed. You married me. You took me into your family. I was going to bear your children. And you thought me capable of the most despicable treachery imaginable. You married me, thinking I was a spy. What were you going to do, watch my every move? Imprison me?" From his expression, she guessed he had considered it. "I did marry you," he said, as if that made a difference. "Oh." The great Julian Croft, Marquis of Blackwood, deigned to marry a woman who was not only compromised, not only poor, but a spy. She stood with her hands hanging at her sides, paint dripping on his precious rug. "I am so honored." As he turned to leave, he stopped, caught by the portrait she'd painted. He stared, motionless. "Me?" he asked. "No one else." Primitive and bold, the painting portrayed him with vivid acrimony. His hair was yellow ochre, his skin a disgusting orange, his bulging purple eyes divulged mania. Worst of all, below the waist, there was nothing. Wavy lines trailed off the canvas. Her very indifference emasculated him. He saw the moment the insult hit him. His expression flattened into emptiness. "Very well, Eleanor, sleep by yourself tonight. But remember this." He scooped her up and carried her to the bed. He placed her on the mattress and swept down atop her like an avenging angel. Gripping her jaw, he held her still and looked into her eyes, and she saw the face of a man who had killed for his country, who would die for justice, who had grown beyond vanity and into a hero, the wretched blackguard. Grabbing his hair, she dragged his lips to hers. She would always know him. He had changed, and she had changed with him. She was a mature and loving woman who deserved a man who believed in her. They strained together, her fingers in his hair, his hands gripping her. She savored him, absorbing him like pure pleasure into her veins, into her tender, adoring, broken heart. Damn him. He didn't believe in her. He didn't love her. Her body must have signaled her desolation, for he lifted his head and stared. "Eleanor." She removed her hands from his body. She turned her head away. When she turned back, his expression was nothing but snow and stones. Standing, he straightened his lapels, not knowing how the pigments that marked her had also marked him. Purple stained his cravat, yellow streaked his forehead. Carmine striped his hair, but below the paint his eyes flared with midnight blue. "Remember that, Eleanor." He moved stiffly away. Flinging herself backward, she covered her eyes with her arm. Never had she allowed herself such an awesome fit of temper. "Remember this," he'd said. Well, she would. No woman could ever forget that kiss. Neither could she forget the betrayal. The next afternoon, she was still in her rooms when Ashworth arrived, his face a mask of geniality that didn't fool her. He found her in the library. "So you've got your dream," he said, "married to Blackwood, and happy as no woman has ever been." She didn't like his tone. "We are just married." "But he's not here." He prowled close, the smell of brandy on his breath. "He's at the Fairchilds, romancing your niece." He stood too close, looking too earnest. "I haven't been home since last night. The Foreign Office has officials searching my house. My wife is telling everything she knows. And I have to get out of the country. It seems fitting that Blackwood's wife accompany me, not only as a companion, but as a safeguard." He took her wrist and twisted it behind her back. The sudden pain brought her up on her toes. "To Italy? Of course you do." Turning her in a circle, he headed her toward the open garden door. "It's your dream, remember?" As she stumbled along, she dropped a sketch from her portfolio. Then another. And another. She would leave a trail for a husband who didn't trust her, but who she knew, with a certainty that was both her curse and her salvation, would come for her. Chak Chan Roy, De La Chuang Koi Kung, Chuang 6. Chapter 6. The Art of Forgiveness. Julian urged his grays along briskly, driven by an ever-increasing sense of unease. What had he been doing, watching over Isabel when his place was at home, talking to Eleanor, making her listen, explaining why he trusted Leo, that flighty charmer, but not her? And that would take some explaining, because he didn't quite understand it himself. He'd heard of men so wild with love they'd betrayed family, home, and country. A Quincy would not succumb to such an extravagant feeling. Except he had. He'd married her thinking her a spy, thinking he had tainted his bloodlines, and thinking none of that mattered as long as he could protect her from the hangman. Pulling up in front of the townhouse, he strode into his home. Servants milled about without direction, flinching at the sight of him. "Where is my lady?" he demanded of the butler. Went's wig was askew, his hands trembling. "My lord, we don't know. She was in the library. She had a visitor. And now she's gone out the garden door." "A visitor? This couldn't be happening." "Who?" "Lord Ashworth, my lord." Went's voice rose in a wail. Running back to the street, Julian looked for his little sentinel. Her broom lay where it had fallen. "Wiggins!" he shouted. Down the street, her arm clutched to her middle, limped Wiggins. "That toff took Lady Blackwood out the alley." The child gasped. "I ran after his carriage until I couldn't run no more. But I lost him. I'm sorry, my lord." "Nonsense," Julian said, scooping her up. "What direction did they go?" "I couldn't keep up," Wiggins repeated, tears sparkling on her eyelashes. "But I've got something for ye." Digging in her grubby clothing, she pulled out a sheet of paper. The lady dropped it out the window. It was one of Eleanor's drawings of ships on the open sea. Julian strode into the library. There, on the floor, was another loose piece of paper. He picked it up. Ashworth, complete with fangs and hair. Glancing out into the yard, he saw another by the open gate. Eleanor had left a trail for him to follow. The trail led him through the twisting streets of London, each drop sketch a beacon of her cleverness, and a testament to his own monumental foolishness. He found the last drawing, a quick, angry rendering of a badger, stomped into the mud at the edge of the docks. "Eleanor, may I call you Eleanor?" Ashworth smiled affably above the barrel of the small pistol he held trained on her back. I'd rather you didn't." "Eleanor," he said deliberately. "Get out of the carriage now." She stepped down into the muck of the street. Rank with garbage, the Thames swept by, slapping against the dock. The ship anchored there, dipped with the current, the gangplank waiting. She glanced behind her, but there was no chance for escape. If she dove into the river, the sewage would probably smother her. If she didn't, she'd be trapped on a ship with a man crazed with greed, and it made her ill to imagine it. Lust for her, "You only want me because of the guilt, you know," she said, trying to buy time. "You're embarrassed that you ran when I needed you." That's true. He was quite genial when getting his way, but taking you to Italy is my way of making reparation. I don't want to go to Italy. With me, the gun barrel poked into her back. I suppose you'd be glad to go with Blackwood. He's my husband. A Quincy would never visit Italy to see the art. A Quincy would never allow his wife to paint. And that particular Quincy will certainly never allow you to sculpt. Will he, Eleanor? Julian wouldn't, of course. She didn't want to go back to a life that stifled her every creative urge. "I knew it," Ashworth chuckled. "Now, hurry. We have to catch the tide." Her future was as murky as the Thames, but she knew the truth of this matter. Turning to face Ashworth, she said, "I'm afraid you have him confused with yourself." His pudgy face pinkened. "What do you mean?" "You gave me up easily enough. My husband would never surrender his wife." From the end of the dock came a familiar voice. "How true, Eleanor." They swung about to see Julian standing there, fists clenched, head down. He looked like a man whose most precious possession had been stolen. "Ashworth, I'm going to kill you." His guttural voice projected a menace that made Ashworth flinch and make a desperate grab for Eleanor. Dodging, she smacked him on the side of the head with the edge of her beloved portfolio. The thump of leather sounded hollow against his skull. Twisting quickly, she rammed him with her shoulder. The gun sailed out of his hand into the river. She had never heard a more satisfying splash. "Bloody damn woman!" His fist shot out. Julian landed on Ashworth. The men went tumbling. Desperately, Eleanor crawled toward the end of the dock, away from the fighting. Oh, Julian would win. No one knew his strength better than she did. But she was tired of being his defeated opponent. Standing, she began collecting her scattered drawings. Behind her, the steady thump of blows accompanied her search. Atho begged for mercy. Finally, he quieted, and a large splash reverberated beneath the dock. When she looked up, she saw Julian, fists bloodied, standing at the edge of the dock and staring into the filthy water. "Julian," she said, smoothing the wrinkles from a sketch, "don't jump in after him. You wouldn't be clean for months." Bastard escaped. As he stared at her, the fury faded from his gaze, worry replacing it. "Did he hurt you?" "No." "Eleanor?" His voice sounded odd, choked and shaky. She put it down to pain. She stared at the ship. Its paint was peeling, its sails drooped, yet it held the appeal of the unknown. She could board that ship and leave disillusionment behind. "Eleanor, I followed your drawings here." Slowly, Julian moved toward her, behaving as if she might flee. "It was very clever of you. Now we'll go home." But the dream of Italy was there, and it could be real. And the reality was here. The reality was Julian. She scrutinized him openly. He was handsome. The bruises could not damage the basic structure. They only added character. "I'm here," she said, her voice distant. "I'm at the docks. There's a ship. It's going to Europe, and that's where I want to be." "Eleanor, I'm going to live the life I always dreamed of. I'll go to Rome and study art. It will be a precarious existence, but no worse than eking out a living as a governess." "You don't have to be a governess. You're the Marchioness of Blackwood." She ignored that unwelcome truth. "I can't wait to begin." "Eleanor." He sounded desperate, but such evidence was not to be trusted. She turned her face to the breeze, relishing the scent of freedom. So what if freedom smelled of the Thames? At least it didn't reek of frustrated expectations. She lifted her chin, took a breath, and smiled. And Julian said, "Eleanor, please, forgive me." At those totally unexpected words, her head whipped around. He was kneeling in his tailored trousers on the filthy, splintered boards of the dock, his head bent in entreaty. "Please, Eleanor, listen to me. You didn't deserve my suspicion." He was kneeling, and that was more than she ever imagined. But he still didn't understand. She should just walk away. Instead, she found herself saying, "It wasn't your suspicion that I hated. It was your condescension. Yes, I was wrong." Rage bubbled in her. Being Eleanor, she did none of the things she wanted to do. She simply stood, her hands bunched into fists, her voice steady and cool. "I'm not noble or rich, But I have more character and more talent in my little finger than you embody in your entire person. I know. You thought I was a spy. Still, he kept his head bent, and she imagined he was smirking. You dared conjecture I would be grateful that you wed me anyway. I was a fool. He looked up at her at last, and when she gazed into the night sky of his eyes, she realized the foolishness of her every conjecture. This public display of humbleness was agony for him. He quivered with the humiliation, but for her, he knelt on the dock in front of his footmen, in front of the whores that lolled across the street, in front of the common sailors on the ship, and he begged, "Eleanor, please, I don't want you to go. I did marry you thinking you were a spy, but haven't you wondered why? I'd walked away from you before, and I couldn't do it again. You've bound me with your wit, and when you smile, I realize you don't do it very often, and I want to find you something to smile about." A vivid purple bruise swelled on his brow. Dirt smudged his chin. He looked hot and disheveled. He looked beautiful. "If you want to live in Rome and paint on the streets, we'll do it together." He shifted on the uncomfortable boards. "Together, Eleanor. I don't think I can paint, but perhaps I could sing, or—" "You dance well. Stupid. Why had she answered?" "Dance, yes." He looked up at her through those extraordinary blue eyes. "Or would you stay with me in England? Take advantage of my true and sincere remorse. Oh, Eleanor, I am really so sorry. And let me build you the best studio any artist ever owned." He'd do it too. A Quincy kept his word. He must have seen her hesitation. He must have known victory was within his grasp. Yet he bent his head once more. "Please, Eleanor, forgive me." Her hand stretched out toward his rumpled crown. Then she remembered. The first rejection. The years of loneliness. His seduction. His marriage. Not because he wanted her, but because he needed a distraction. Her hand clenched. "Eleanor," he said in a low voice, "I love you. I love you. I love you." He'd said that? Oh, but really, so what? She stared at her hand. If she opened it and laid her palm on his head, she would have to be mad. Or in love herself. Was she? Was she in love with a Julian who had been stripped of all illusion and still was never less than her ideal? Slowly, gradually, her fist opened. Yes, she was in love. She placed her hand on him. He lifted his head, and her hand slid down over his cheek. He didn't look humble or happy. His nostrils flared and his teeth were bared. He was the epitome of a savage who would reach out and take what he wished. And he wished for her. Standing, he wrapped his arms around her waist and brought her close, body to body and soul to soul. His words were a soft growl against her lips. "Woman, you'll pay for making me wait." He kissed her, a soft, explicit kiss that promised and demanded. The ship's crew, hanging over the railing, yelled crude encouragement. "How embarrassing!" she said weakly. "What?" Bending, Julian put his shoulder into her stomach and lifted her so she draped him like a scarf. The shouting intensified as he strode off the dock. Eleanor lifted her head and cheerfully waved to the ship. "I'll let you sculpt our children too," he said. "Shall we name the oldest Figgy?" He didn't pause. "No, but I won't let you sculpt anyone else. Not when you have the distressing tendency to sculpt naked bodies." Discovering a heretofore unexplored wicked streak, she could not resist saying, "You can't stop my imagination." He halted. "Eleanor." He sounded uncertain, and she found she didn't like that. In a pleasant tone, she said, "But you're the only one I've wanted to sculpt as a nude." "Really?" He started walking again. "And if you'll pose for me, I have a statue to finish when we get home." "I'll pose for you," setting her on her feet. He grinned at her with the kind of smile she'd dreamed of all her life. "If you'll let me wash the clay off of you afterward." This marriage, she realized, was going to work very well indeed.